The moment I stepped onto the hospital's 8th floor for my night shift, I knew something was different. The fluorescent lights above fluttered more than usual, casting long, distorted shadows across the empty corridor that seemed to move on their own. I'd been working this night shift rotation at Memorial General for almost 3 years. The hospital was over a century old, with the original wing, where I now worked, dating back to when the building had served as a tuberculosis sanitarium. Most nurses requested transfers after a few months on this floor. Too quiet, they'd say, too isolated. But I'd grown accustomed to the solitude, or so I thought. The usual night sounds greeted me as I signed in at the nurses' station. The soft hum of medical equipment, the occasional distant chime of a patient call button, and the barely audible whisper of the ventilation system. I poured myself the first of many cups of coffee and reviewed the patient charts. 8 rooms occupied tonight, mostly post-op recoveries and 1 hospice case. In room 812, an elderly man with late-stage cancer who hadn't had visitors in days. "Anything I should know about?" I asked Lisa, the evening nurse, gathering her things to leave. She hesitated, her fingers tightening around her purse strap. "Room 809 has been complaining." "About what?" "Someone standing at the foot of her bed at night, just watching." Lisa shrugged, but her eyes darted to the hallway. "You know how patients get on this medication. Hallucinations are common." After Lisa left, the floor fell into that distinctive night hospital quiet. A silence that wasn't really silence at all, but a collection of subtle, persistent sounds. The soft beeping of monitors, the squeak of my shoes against the recently waxed linoleum, the gentle rattle of the ancient heating system pushing warm air through the vents. I started my first rounds at 11 p.m., moving methodically from room to room. Most patients were asleep, their breathing forming a gentle rhythm that contrasted with the mechanical beeps of their monitors. I adjusted IVs, checked vitals, and documented everything in hushed tones on my tablet. When I reached room 809, Ms. Jenkins, recovering from gallbladder surgery, I found her wide awake, her thin fingers clutching the bedsheet pulled up to her chin. "Everything okay, Ms. Jenkins?" I kept my voice low, professional. Her eyes, magnified by thick glasses, fixed on me with an intensity that felt immediately wrong. "It's been in all the rooms tonight," she whispered. "I can hear it moving, checking on everyone." I felt a chill despite the overheated air. "I'm the only one making rounds, Ms. Jenkins. Would you like something to help you sleep?" She shook her head violently. "Not you. Before you. It stops when you get close. It's waiting for you to finish so it can start again." I administered her scheduled pain medication despite her protests and continued my rounds, trying to shake off her words. The hallway seemed longer now, the shadows deeper in the corners where the flickering lights couldn't reach. In room 812, Mr. Winters, our hospice patient, was awake too, which surprised me. His condition had been deteriorating rapidly, and he'd been unconscious for most of the previous day. "Mr. Winters!" I approached his bed, checking his vital signs on the monitor. His pulse was steady, which was unexpected. "Not my name," he rasped, his voice like sandpaper on stone. "Not my body." I assumed it was the confusion that often comes with end-of-life care. "You're at Memorial General, sir. I'm just checking on you." His hand shot out with impossible strength and gripped my wrist. His fingers felt ice cold and somehow wrong. Too long, the joints bending at unnatural angles. "It likes this floor," he whispered, his breath carrying the unmistakable smell of decay despite the oral care we'd given him hours earlier. "It's been here since before the machines, before the lights, when this place was full of the dying." I gently removed his hand, noting how the skin felt loose, almost like an ill-fitting glove. Try to rest, Mr. Winters. It wears them, he continued, his eyes not blinking, when they're weak. When they're near the end. It practices being them. Back at the nurse's station, I found myself watching the security monitors more closely than usual. The grainy black and white feed showed empty hallways, quiet rooms, normal shadows. I tried to focus on updating patient charts, but my concentration kept breaking at every small sound. The ice machine down the hall dispensing cubes into the empty bin. The elevator dinging as it passed our floor without stopping. The occasional creak of the building settling. The clock read 2:17 a.m. when the power flickered. Just for a second, barely enough to notice. But when the lights stabilized, I could have sworn the security monitor showed a figure standing in the hallway outside, room 812. When I blinked, the hallway was empty again. I decided to do another round of checks. The rational part of my brain blamed the late hour and the power fluctuation for my growing unease. Hospitals at night played tricks on everyone eventually. The hallway felt colder as I walked down it. Not the artificial chill of air conditioning, but a deep, penetrating cold that seemed to seep from the walls themselves. My breath didn't fog, yet I felt the cold in my lungs with each inhalation. As I passed room 809, I heard Ms. Jenkins whimpering. I looked in to find her pressed against the headboard, her eyes fixed on the corner of the room. "It's there," she hissed without looking at me. "Can't you see it?" The corner held nothing but a visitor's chair and the shadow of her IV stand. "Ms. Jenkins, there's nothing." "It's wearing the old man now," she interrupted, her voice breaking, "but it's already looking for the next one." A sharp electronic tone cut through the air, a flatline alert from down the hall. Room 812. "Mr. Winters." I ran, my shoes squeaking against the floor, the sound echoing off the walls far longer than it should have. When I reached his room, I found exactly what the monitor had indicated. Mr. Winters lay motionless, his eyes open and fixed on the ceiling, no pulse, no breathing. I went through the motions, calling the code even though he had a DNR, checking for signs of life even though I knew I wouldn't find any. What I couldn't explain was why his body felt warm to the touch. Not the warmth of life, but as if something hot had recently vacated it, leaving residual heat behind. As I recorded the time of death and prepared to contact the on-call doctor, the lights flickered again. Longer this time, and I felt something brush past me in the darkness. Not a physical touch, but a displacement of air, like something large moving quickly. When the lights stabilized, I could have sworn Mr. Winters' body was in a slightly different position. The rest of my shift was mechanical. I made the calls. I completed the paperwork. I checked the remaining patients. Ms. Jenkins finally fell asleep after another dose of medication. I tried not to notice how the security monitors showed brief static whenever I looked directly at them, or how the temperature seemed to drop every time I walked past room 812. When morning arrived, I gave my report to the day nurse, excluding the strange occurrences. In the harsh, fluorescent light of day, with the bustle of the hospital coming to life around us, last night's fears seemed foolish. "Oh, one more thing," the day nurse said as I was leaving. "They're moving a new patient into 812 this afternoon. Poor thing's not expected to last the week." I nodded and headed for the elevator, telling myself I would request a transfer to another floor tomorrow. As the doors closed, I caught my reflection in the polished metal surface. For just a moment, so brief I could almost convince myself I imagined it, my smile seemed wider than it should be, my eyes darker, my movements not quite synchronized with my intentions. Just a trick of the light, I thought, as I descended to the ground floor. Just the exhaustion of the night shift. But I know I'll be back tonight. After all, I always enjoy the night shift, the quiet, the routine, the rounds. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. For more terrifying tales, leave a comment below with what you think was really happening on the 8th floor. The strange knocking sound started somewhere around mile marker 212, just as the rain began to pound against the windshield of my semi. At first I thought it was road debris, maybe a piece of a blown-out tire hitting the undercarriage as I drove over it. But after 10 miles of that irregular tapping, I knew something was wrong. I've been hauling freight across the country for 23 years. Driving a truck is all I know, all I've ever wanted to know. You get used to the sounds. Every rattle, hum, and vibration becomes a familiar language. This sound wasn't part of that vocabulary. The interstate stretched before me, an empty black ribbon cutting through the Nevada desert. At 2:37 a.m., there were no other vehicles in sight, just the hypnotic sweep of my high beams, revealing sagebrush and scrub at the roadside. My GPS estimated another 4 hours until my next mandated rest stop. But that persistent knocking made my decision for me. When I spotted the sign for a rest area 1 mile ahead, I put on my signal. Force of habit, really. There was nobody to signal to out here, just me, the rain, and that goddamn knocking. The rest area was little more than a widened shoulder with a couple of weather-beaten picnic tables, a shuttered information kiosk, and a restroom building that had seen better decades. I pulled the truck into the deserted lot, the wheels crunching on loose gravel. As I cut the engine, the knocking stopped too. I sat there for a moment, listening to the rain hammer against the cab roof and trying to convince myself I'd imagined the sound. The digital clock on my dashboard glowed an eerie green in the darkness. 2:52 a.m. That dead time of night when the world feels thinnest, when the mind plays its cruelest tricks. Grabbing my flashlight from the glove compartment, I decided to inspect the rig. The beam cut weakly through the downpour as I circled the truck, looking for anything obviously wrong. A loose panel, damaged suspension, something caught in the wheel wells. Nothing seemed out of place. That left the trailer. I'd picked up this load in Salt Lake City, furniture bound for a new apartment complex in Los Angeles. Nothing unusual, nothing that would explain the noise. But as I approached the rear doors, my flashlight flickering from the rain, seeping into the casing, I felt a deep reluctance to check inside. A coldness that had nothing to do with the weather crept up my spine. My hand hesitated on the locking bar. I told myself I was being ridiculous. This was my job, my responsibility. I needed to make sure my cargo was secure, that nothing had shifted during transit that could cause damage or affect the truck's handling. The lock released with a heavy clunk that seemed unnaturally loud in the empty rest area. I pulled the door open just enough to shine my light inside. The furniture sat exactly as it had been loaded, wrapped in protective plastic, strapped securely to the walls of the trailer. Sofas, tables, bed frames, all silent and innocent. I was about to close up when my flashlight caught something odd, a dark smudge on the plastic covering one of the mattresses. I opened the door wider and climbed inside for a better look. The air in the trailer felt different, dense and cold, with an underlying smell I couldn't quite identify. Not quite rotting, not quite chemical, something else entirely. The smudge turned out to be a handprint, a small child-sized handprint pressed against the inside of the plastic. But it wasn't made of dirt or grease as I'd first thought. The plastic was melted, the impression seared into it as if by intense heat. I stared at it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. That's when I heard the knocking again, not from outside or underneath, but from inside one of the large wooden crates strapped at the back of the trailer. Knock, knock, knock. 3 distinct taps, then silence. Hello? My voice sounded pathetically small in the cavernous space of the trailer. Is someone there? Knock, knock, knock. Logic told me it had to be an animal, a stray cat maybe, or some desert creature that had sought shelter in the warehouse and gotten trapped during loading. but logic couldn't explain the perfect rhythm of the knocks or why they seemed to respond to my voice. I moved closer to the crate, my flashlight beam dancing wildly as my hand shook. According to the manifest, it contained a dining room table with chairs. Nothing alive, nothing that could knock. Knock, knock, knock. I pressed my ear against the wooden surface. The knocking stopped immediately, replaced by something worse, the sound of breathing. Shallow, ragged breaths, like someone trying to stay quiet but unable to control their desperate need for air. "I'm going to get help," I said, not knowing if I was speaking to a stowaway, an animal, or something my mind was conjuring from stress and exhaustion. I turned to leave, but as I moved, my flashlight beam swept across the far corner of the trailer where another set of crates was secured. There, crouched low between two boxes, I caught a glimpse of movement. A small, dark shape that seemed to shrink back from the light. My heart hammered in my chest as I forced the beam back to that spot. Nothing, just boxes and furniture, shadows and plastic wrap. I backed out of the trailer, keeping the light trained inside until I was clear of the doors. With trembling hands, I slammed them shut and re-engaged the lock. The knocking resumed immediately, louder now, more insistent. Back in the safety of my cab, I called dispatch. The phone rang 6 times before someone answered. "Central Dispatch, this is Marcus." "This is driver 4577, John Garland," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I need to verify my cargo manifest from Salt Lake City." "At 3 in the morning, Marcus sounded annoyed. "Can it wait until you reach your destination?" "Number, I need to know exactly what's supposed to be in my trailer." I gripped the phone tighter as another series of knocks, louder than before, emanated from behind me. I heard keyboard clicking, then a pause. "That's weird," Marcus said. "Your manifest shows furniture for Los Angeles. Pickup from Morrison Warehouse in Salt Lake City." "That's right. What's weird about it?" "Morrison Warehouse burned down 3 weeks ago. Total loss, nothing salvageable." The knocking had stopped. In its place came a sound like something heavy being dragged across the floor of the trailer. "That's impossible," I said. "I was there yesterday. I watched them load the truck." "Hold on." More clicking. "John, this doesn't make sense. According to our records, truck 4577 is currently in for maintenance in our Chicago facility. Has been for 10 days. You shouldn't be on the road at all." A sound like fingernails dragging slowly across metal came from the trailer, followed by a high, thin giggle that raised the hair on my neck. "I need to go," I said, fumbling for my keys. "John, wait." I hung up and fired up the engine, desperate to get moving, to reach civilization and lights and other people. But as I shifted into gear, my headlights illuminated a figure standing in the rain, directly in front of my truck. A child, maybe 8 or 9 years old, soaking wet in what looked like charred pajamas. Their skin was ghastly pale in the headlights, their eyes impossibly dark. They smiled, too wide, too many teeth, and raised one blackened hand in greeting. I blinked, and they were gone. Just rain and empty asphalt where they had stood. The knocking had returned, but it was different now. No longer coming from the trailer, but from directly behind me. From inside the cab. From the sleeper berth just inches from my head. Knock, knock, knock. I couldn't turn around. Wouldn't turn around. Instead, I slammed the truck into gear and pulled out onto the highway, pushing the speedometer well past the legal limit. The knocking continued, matching pace with the frantic beating of my heart. I drove through the night, never stopping, even as the smell of smoke gradually filled the cab, even as small handprints began to appear on the inside of my windshield, seared into the glass by impossible heat. I'm still driving now. The sun rose hours ago, but the inside of my cab remains dark, filled with shadows that move when I'm not looking directly at them. My phone is dead. The GPS is showing me traveling along a road that doesn't exist on any map, and the knocking never stops. If anyone picks up this transmission, stay away from Highway 50 in Nevada. Stay away from unmarked trucks. And if you hear knocking in the night, coming from somewhere it shouldn't, don't answer. Don't ever answer. If you enjoyed this tale of terror, make sure to like and subscribe for more stories that'll keep you up at night. Leave a comment below about what you think was really in the truck. The first thing they teach you as a security guard at Meridian Museum is to never look too long at the exhibits after midnight. They frame it as professionalism. Focus on securing the perimeter, not admiring the artifacts. But veteran guards know the real reason. I learned it the hard way during my third week on the job. The Meridian isn't like other museums. Tucked away in a forgotten corner of downtown, it specializes in what the director calls culturally sensitive antiquities from around the world. Items with complex provenance is the euphemism they use in official documentation. What they don't mention in the employment contract is that some of these items were never meant to leave their places of origin, and they don't rest easily in their glass cases. The pay is good though, better than any security position has a right to be. Time and a half for night shifts, full benefits, even for part-timers like me. Now I understand why they need to offer such incentives. My shift that night started normally enough. I clocked in at 11 p.m., received the handoff briefing from the evening guard, and began my first walkthrough. The museum was divided into 6 main galleries arranged in a circle around a central atrium. My assigned patrol route took me through each gallery every hour, with the remaining time spent monitoring the security feeds from the desk in the main hall. The problem began during my 1 a.m. round. I was passing through the Mesopotamian exhibit when the temperature dropped suddenly. I could see my breath clouding in front of me, despite knowing that the climate control system kept the building at a constant 70 degrees to preserve the artifacts. That's when I noticed it, a subtle change in one of the display cases. Inside was a small clay figurine labeled as a protective household deity from around 3000 BCE. In the dim emergency lighting, I could have sworn it was facing a different direction than it had been on my previous round. I paused, staring at it longer than I should have. The figurine wasn't particularly remarkable, a crude humanoid shape with oversized eyes that consumed most of its face. But something about those eyes seemed to hold depth now that hadn't been there before, like looking into vertical pools of black water rather than the flat clay surface I'd seen earlier. My radio crackled, making me jump. Williams, status check. It was Martinez, the senior guard monitoring the cameras from the security office. All clear in Mesopotamian, I responded, forcing myself to look away from the figurine. Moving to Egyptian now. The Egyptian gallery was always my least favorite, something about the sarcophagi with their painted faces staring eternally upward. But tonight it felt almost welcoming after the unnatural cold of the previous room. I completed my rounds and returned to the desk in the main hall, where multiple security camera feeds displayed on the monitors. Most showed empty galleries with artifacts sitting motionless in their displays. But when I looked at the feed for the Mesopotamian gallery, I felt a chill run through me. The figurine was angled differently again, its head now turned slightly toward the camera. I blinked, leaned closer to the screen. Next to me, the radio sat silent. Martinez hadn't noticed anything unusual from the security office downstairs. I should have called it in, should have reported the potential tampering with an exhibit. Instead, I decided to check it myself. New guy trying to prove his competence, not wanting to sound the alarm over what was probably nothing more than a trick of light and shadow. The hallway back to the Mesopotamian gallery seemed longer than before, the emergency lighting dimmer. As I approached, I noticed the temperature dropping again, cold air flowing out from the entrance like an invisible fog. Inside, everything looked exactly as it should at first. The figurine sat in its display case, facing forward just as the exhibit designer had positioned it. I approached cautiously, flashlight beam trained on the case. The security glass reflected my face back at me, distorted slightly by its curve. Behind my reflection, the figurine's oversized eyes seemed to absorb my flashlight beam rather than reflect it. I leaned closer, trying to determine if the case had been tampered with. The security seal appeared intact. Just as I was about to turn away, satisfied that nothing was amiss, I noticed something in my reflection that turned my blood to ice. I wasn't alone in the reflection. Behind me stood a figure, humanoid but wrong somehow, proportions slightly off, with a head too large for its body and eyes that dominated its face, exactly like the figurine but life-sized. I spun around, heart pounding, but the gallery behind me was empty. When I turned back to the case, the figurine had moved. It now pressed one misshapen hand against the glass from the inside, as if testing its barrier. My radio remained silent as I backed away. Museum protocol dictated that I report any suspicious activity immediately, but some primal instinct told me not to take my eyes off the figure, not to speak, not to do anything that might acknowledge what I was seeing. As I reached the gallery entrance, the overhead lights flickered once, plunging the room into total darkness for just a fraction of a second. When they stabilized, the figurine was back in its original position, sitting innocently in the center of its display. I returned to the security desk, hands shaking as I checked the camera feed. The figurine appeared normal, motionless. I questioned my own perception. Had I imagined it all? Was exhaustion from working 3 consecutive night shifts playing tricks on my mind? Martinez's voice came through on the radio again. "Williams, you okay? Your heart rate monitor is spiking." I'd forgotten about the biometric trackers in our security badges, standard equipment for guards working alone at night, designed to alert others if someone collapsed or was injured. "I'm fine," I lied. Thought I saw movement in Mesopotamian, but it was nothing. Probably just the reflection of my flashlight. "Want me to come up and check it out?" "No," I said too quickly. "I've got it under control." The rest of my shift passed in tense hypervigilance. I kept the Mesopotamian gallery feed on the main monitor, watching for any sign of movement. The figurine remained still, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was waiting for something. At 5 a.m., I began my final walkthrough before the morning staff arrived. I saved the Mesopotamian gallery for last, almost hoping I could avoid it entirely. But dereliction of duty would be noted in my performance review, and I needed this job. The gallery felt different this time, the air heavy and charged, like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm. As I swept my flashlight across the exhibit, something caught my attention. A sound like dry clay scraping against glass, almost imperceptible. The figurine's case was empty. I froze, listening intently while scanning the shadows with my flashlight. The sound came again, a soft, dragging noise from the far corner of the gallery. Training my light in that direction, I saw it. The figurine, no longer figurine-sized, but now as large as a child, crouched behind a display pedestal. It moved with jerky, unnatural motions, its clay body seeming to crack and reform with each movement. Those oversized eyes reflected my flashlight beam now, but the reflection was wrong, too bright, too aware. I backed toward the exit, radio raised to call for help, when the lights went out completely. Not just the gallery, but my flashlight too, leaving me in perfect darkness. Something cold and rough brushed against my hand in the blackness. A voice spoke directly into my ear, not in English, but somehow I understood every word. "You look too long," it whispered in a voice like grinding stone. "Now I see you too." The emergency lights came back on seconds later. I was alone in the gallery, my radio silent in my shaking hand. The figurine sat in its case, exactly where it should be, facing forward with those empty, oversized eyes. When the morning staff arrived, I said nothing about what had happened. What could I say that wouldn't sound like the delusions of an overtired mind? But as I walked to my car in the early morning light, I noticed something that stopped me cold. My reflection in the car window showed dark smudges on my neck and face, smudges shaped like small clay handprints. I still work at the Meridian. The pay is too good to leave, and somehow I know finding another job wouldn't make a difference anyway. I've learned the unwritten rules now. Don't look too long at any exhibit after midnight. Don't acknowledge the movements you see in your peripheral vision. And most importantly, never ever let them know you can see them, because once they know you're watching, they'll never stop watching you back. When the lights go out, when the halls are empty, when the world thinks the artifacts are safely contained behind their glass, that's when the true nature of the collection reveals itself. The Nightwatch at Meridian isn't about protecting the exhibits from people. It's about protecting people from the exhibits. And sometimes we fail. If this story kept you on edge, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more tales from the darkness. Drop a comment below about what museum artifacts you think might come alive after hours.